Beyond the Inner Critic, How to Be at Peace with Your Unfinished Self. Right now, there is a deep, burning tightness concentrated in the center of your stomach and pulling hard along the lower margins of your ribs. A visceral frustration that flares up whenever you catch a familiar, unwanted tone echoing out of your own mouth. You are recoiling from the sudden, chilling realization that you have just repeated the exact behavioral mistake, the same sharp defensiveness or reactive pattern that you spent your entire youth despising in your own family line. It is a deeply discouraging, heavy isolation to experience in the dark. This sudden fear that your mind is merely a spinning wheel bound to stamp the identical fractured crest onto every single day you touch. Around you, the air is settling into a cool, rich dampness, carrying the dense, comforting scent of wet mountain loam and raw earth from the nearby garden beds. A soft, steady rustle of overgrown elderberry bushes brushing against the low wooden siding measures the slow passing of the wind, while the heavy, coarse texture of an unspun wool drape anchors your limbs into a still, protective hollow. You are not a ruined vessel because an old, inherited imprint has surfaced in your reactions tonight. Nor have you failed your own life because a phantom from your upbringing has briefly spoken through your skin. The fluid, unformed baseline of your awareness has never been permanently damaged by the designs of those who walked before you, and tonight, no one is asking you to forcefully sand down your history to earn a moment of peace. We are not here to aggressively smash the wheel, or to demand an instant transformation of your conditioning before the sun rises. Instead, we are simply going to let the attention sink heavily into the dark, leaving the inherited wooden stamps of your past completely unlifted, allowing the soft clay of your immediate torso to remain entirely wide, uncorrected, and still. There is a profound paradox in the way we wrestle with our familial conditioning. The intellect continuously insists that if we can just punish ourselves enough for our reactivity, or if we can maintain a state of constant internal vigilance, we will finally break the momentum of the bloodline. We believe that by clamping our jaws tight against the old ghost, we can prevent the flawed pattern from pressing into our lives. But the ancient insights of the Buddha reveal a much gentler, liberating reality. True liberation from the past never comes from fighting the imprint with hatred, because pushing against a family pattern only locks its shape deeper into the fabric of your nervous system. When you meet an inherited reaction with self-loathing, you are not clearing the slate. You are merely pressing the old wooden emblem down with double the force. The suffering you carry tonight is not the result of the passing habit itself, but the result of the secondary layer of shame that declares you are permanently doomed to become the people who hurt you. Think of how a simple lump of moist, raw earth rests on a potter's bench before the wheel ever begins to spin. It is dark, cool, and perfectly whole in its unformed quietude, carrying an organic purity that needs no decorative stamp to hold its place in the world. Every time you replay a family argument out of guilt, every time you search your own actions for a sign that you are becoming your parents, it is as if you are driving a cracked wooden mold into a delicate, wet surface. You distort the natural space, producing nothing but sharp, deep ridges that trap the heat of old anger inside your belly, forcing the stomach to carry a tight, burning armor through the midnight hours. Month after month, you have been balancing this heavy family ledger on your chest, wondering why your breath feels so constricted by midnight, wondering why it feels so difficult to let your ribs turn soft within the room. Maybe you have felt this specific congestion during an ordinary conversation with someone you love, where a sudden flash of irritation made you snap too quickly, immediately dropping your stomach into a cold, leaden guilt as you recognized your parents' exact phrase living in your throat. You might have noticed it late at night, where you found yourself mentally checking your entire personality for signs of the family flaw, reviewing your day like a judge looking for a hidden defect in the clay. It is an exhausting destiny to be performing absolute stability, while your internal awareness is terrified of your own genetic shadows. It drains the baseline warmth straight out of the core, leaving you with a brittle, guarded sensation in the center of the abdomen, even when you have kept the outward surface perfectly calm for the world around you. In a short while, we will travel to a quiet pottery shed surrounded by elderberry bushes. a space that shows us a completely different way to relate to our unformed nature. But before we enter that cool wooden room, let this immediate space become entirely free of the family timeline. The heavy stamps of your self-criticism can be left on the shelf. The intellectual search does not need to cross-examine a single inherited trait. You do not have to fix the mistakes of your upbringing before you close your eyes, nor do you need to calculate how you will outrun your history tomorrow. The entire unshaped reality of your current sorrow can simply rest across the pillow, unmarked, unexplained, and completely safe from inspection. Let your awareness sink heavily into the physical presence of the bed beneath you. Notice the exact places where the back of the skull, the shoulder blades, the lower spine, and the heels meet the firm support below. Every one of these points is being fully carried by the earth, without you needing to offer a single day of flawless behavior to earn its stability. You do not need to perform the role of the person who has entirely outgrown their childhood tonight. You do not need to be the perfectly healed adult, the untethered pioneer, or the one who never feels the old heat in their blood. The dark is entirely wide enough to hold the full, unvarnished depth of an uncarved form. As you lie here, notice if the small micromuscles around the center of the stomach are still bracing against the dark, as if you are still trying to hold the old wheel from spinning out of your control. See if you can allow the collarbones to fall wide and flat, letting the throat widen and the ribs turn soft. Let the breath move into the body with a slow, unhurried ease, as if the air no longer has to pass through a filter of constant self-scrutiny. There is absolutely nothing you need to correct in this exact breath. You are safe enough right now to let the inherited shapes remain completely still in the shadows, letting your true spirit rest in the quiet sanctuary of the night. A narrow dirt pathway, softened by falling leaves and bordered by wild elderberry bushes, wound down behind the low storage barns toward a secluded corner of the monastery grounds where the public rarely traveled. Along this quiet terrace stood a small pottery shed, its weathered oak timbers damp from the autumn mist, where a young artisan named Ren worked with a rigid, hurried posture that carried the heavy friction of a secret, internal war. Ren was responsible for shaping the simple utilitarian vessels used in the daily meals, a duty he performed with a deep, burning ache that locked the muscles of his lower stomach into a constant state of defense. Years before, his late father, a master potter known for his fierce temperament and sudden outbursts of reactive anger, had passed down the workshop tools, including a heavy, cracked cherrywood emblem stamp. Ren had since become deeply trapped in a painful routine, spending his afternoons sitting over the spinning wheel, frantically trying to prove he could produce vessels that carried no flaws, yet always ending his sessions by forcing the inherited stamp into the wet clay. Instead of letting the clean earth speak for itself, Ren lived in constant fear that his own internal landscape was naturally defective, a panic that made him look at every minor slip of his hands as a sign that he was doomed to repeat his father's harsh legacy. He believed that if he could just apply the family crest with absolute, flawless precision, he could somehow conquer the historical ghost, transforming a symbol of fear into a badge of perfect discipline. But every time he pressed the wooden block into the spinning vessel, his fingers would clamp the handle with a tight, anxious force that ruined the natural thickness of the walls. The heavy, cracked stamp would tear the delicate loam, creating deep, jagged fissures along the rim that made the entire bowl collapse into a ruined heap on the wheel head. This constant, desperate effort to outrun his upbringing left a burning tension under his ribs, making it impossible to relax his abdomen or find a single hour of calm sleep. Seeking a way to cool the hot pressure in his belly, Ren carried a tray of his collapsed pieces into the coolest alcove of the shed, a quiet corner where the floorboards met the damp mountain earth. An elderly potter, a quiet master named Dago, sat silently on a low stool near the small charcoal kiln, using a simple piece of wet leather to round the smooth rim of an unadorned container. The room was thick with the rich, comforting scent of wet mountain loam and the sharp tang of wood smoke, completely insulated from the rising wind that rustled the elderberry bushes outside the paper screens. The old man did not look up when the young worker entered, nor did he offer a quick word of reassurance to ease his heavy expression. He merely set down his piece of wet leather on the bench, watching the way Ren held the cracked wooden stamp against his chest like an iron shield. Ren laid his ruined work across the table, his throat tightening as he began to lay out the heavy circle of his fears. He explained the immense exhaustion of his daily struggle, telling the old master how he endlessly monitored his own voice during arguments, checking his bloodline for the father's heat, and trying to decipher the reactivity that seemed to live in his bones. He told him that despite his best efforts to force the family crest onto the clay, the cracked wood kept splitting the soft loam, leaving his center feeling completely restricted and hollow. Master Daigo remained perfectly still for a long moment, listening to the soft rhythmic hum of the spinning wheel as the wind stirred the branches far out in the valley. He slowly reached out his hand, took the heavy cherry wood stamp from the young man's white knuckles, and placed it right on the edge of the workbench. The young potter took up a fresh lump of dark, moist earth, his arms turning rigid as he prepared to spin another vessel to test his control against the wheel. Guided by his old habit of over-monitoring, he held his breath, locked his lower ribs, and tried to force a smooth, decorative flourish that would shield the underlying surface from any signs of his family's defect. Every time he pressed his thumbs down, the soft loam puckered against the uneven speed, creating tiny, distorted ripples that threw the entire structure out of alignment with the center. He tightened the small muscles across his stomach, leaning closer in the dim lantern light as if his own physical willpower could compel the ancestral imprint to vanish from his hands. The hot ache along his lower ribs intensified, and the muscles running down the side of his spine locked into a stiff, painful brace. The minutes moved slowly through the damp wooden shed, marked only by the repetitive slap of the wet earth and the absolute silence of the autumn night. Ren's palms grew damp from the internal strain, yet the unformed clay looked more fractured than before, its soft walls refusing to look complete under the heavy pressure of his anxiety. The frantic urgency to make the vessel look perfectly level was producing the very ruin he was trying to escape. Master Daigo stood up from his low stool and walked across the damp floorboards, stopping right beside the straining potter. He did not reprimand him for his clumsy handiwork, nor did he tell him to study the techniques of the ancient guilds with greater care. He gently reached down, placed his cool, wet fingers over the young man's rigid wrists, and guided his hands entirely away from the spinning wheel. Daigo looked down at the uneven lump of earth and asked the young man why he was trying to stamp an old name onto a clean form before the clay had even learned to stand in the light. Ren replied that he had to fix it, that if he allowed the bowl to remain plain without conquering the crest, the emptiness would mean he was fundamentally identical to the one who hurt him, and his own place in the workshop would be completely lost. The old master did not offer a long lecture. Instead, he reached onto a low shelf behind the wheel, pulled out a very old earthen bowl that had been thrown by an ancient, forgotten builder, and laid it flat in the light. The vessel was entirely unadorned, its dark surface holding no stamped patterns, emblems, or signatures whatsoever, showing only the raw, honest texture of the mountain loam that had been seasoned by the kiln. The bowl did not shrink from its lack of decoration, nor did it try to force an artificial symmetry onto its history. It simply occupied its true space on the bench, its wide rim catching the lantern light, while the deep silence of the shed wrapped around its borders. As the heavy pressure of the wooden stamp was dropped, Ren felt the tight knot in his stomach open slightly, allowing a long, unhurried breath to pass through his torso. The old master noted that a beautiful vessel carries the truth of the mountain, not because it conquers an old family crest, but because its unformed earth knows how to hold the dark without needing a name to prove its value. Ren looked down at the unadorned bowl resting in the dim light, realizing how much energy he had wasted trying to force his own nature into a shape that was never meant to be stamped. The sharp, hot tension along his lower ribs had loosened by a small fraction. Yet as the autumn mist climbed higher against the outer wooden siding, a deeper transformation remained completely unlit. The young potter had stepped away from the wheel, but the urgent longing to protect his timeline from the family ghost was still carved like a hidden pattern deep within his mind. This quiet interaction over the ancient, unornamented earthen bowl in the damp pottery shed does not mean you should stop feeling the raw human sorrow that comes with a complicated upbringing. Nor does it ask you to view your family history with a cold, unfeeling indifference. It is not an invitation to become a detached observer who refuses to acknowledge the real pain of your early years, or who steps away from the deep capacity for sensitivity that makes the heart alive. Buddhist wisdom points toward a completely different kind of interior posture, a soft, heavy honesty that rests underneath the frantic urge to physically rewrite the history of your character out of a deep sense of unworthiness. The hot, burning tightness we carry directly in the center of our stomach is rarely caused by the simple fact that our lives contain real seasons of inherited difficulty, or moments where an old habitual loop flashes through our reactions. Rather, the true exhaustion comes from the hidden blueprint we hold in our thoughts. The rigid belief that says an imperfect reaction is a structural failure that must be forcefully hammered into a display of absolute control to prove our value. We become deeply attached to our identity as the defective child, gripping our constant self-monitoring and our internal auditing routines as if they were the only things preventing our total erasure. This desperate grip turns our natural capacity for growth into a state of constant, exhausting internal warfare. When we look at this pattern through a gentler light, we begin to see that our distress intensifies when we try to force an emotional terrain that is inherently designed to unfold in its own slow season. An inherited tone will leave its natural shadow, an unexpected flash of irritation will bring its own hot gravity, and your mind will occasionally experience a sorrow that cannot be solved by a sharp correction. This is the authentic reality of being human. But when we demand that our behavioral container remain perfectly symmetrical and flawless through every turn, we are trying to turn a living, fluid lump of loam into a rigid box that cannot carry the weight of real life without splitting apart. Every time you strike your own spirit with a heavy phrase of self-criticism, every time you search your own actions for a hidden verdict on your worth, it is as if another forced blow is delivered to the delicate fabric of your structure. The wooden block smudges the lines, producing nothing but dark, chaotic stains that blur your true vision, trapping the damp chill of your real grief underneath, and forcing the stomach to carry a tight, aching armor through the night. Month after month, year after year, you have been balancing this heavy family ledger on your chest, wondering why your breathing feels so constricted by midnight, wondering why it feels so difficult to let your lungs expand with a deep, unhurried ease. The core of this insight reveals that the heaviest burden is a secondary layer of friction that we actively build into our own experience. The world may bring us a genuine moment of familial reactivity, or an unreturned investment of patience, which arrives like a single cracked line in the wet loam. That is the natural weight of living. But the mind, in its terror of looking insufficient, immediately reaches for the heavy tools of resistance. We spend the quiet hours of the night mentally replaying the final conversations of our youth, calculating how we will fix our reactions tomorrow, trying to decipher past patterns, and packing the tension down into a tight, dense knot along the throat. The original pain took up only a small space in the torso, but our internal litigation goes on for hours, creating a heavy, rigid artifact that restricts the very breath in our lungs. Peace does not come from finding a magical valley where no old reactions ever surface or where no imperfect traits ever appear. A life completely free of sudden memories, shifting boundaries, or irregular behaviors does not exist anywhere in the human world. True spiritual freedom begins when you stop treating every inherited habit as a sign that you must change your design, allowing the earthen vessel to rest in the center of the shed, and letting its surface remain smooth until the morning. You change your relationship with the past by choosing not to turn it into an immediate emergency project for your anxiety. True awareness is the gentle capacity to step back from the writing table, to simply notice the heavy search as it forms in your thoughts, without letting your physical posture be driven into a forced position of defense. It means observing that a pattern of over-monitoring has arisen, recognizing its familiar, tight texture, and choosing not to pull its vertical strain down the center of your throat. You see the expectation of perfection, but you do not let it become your cage. You do not turn the temporary necessity of facing an unknown future into a permanent state of expressive siege that defines how you must rest. When we look at our own history through this compassionate lens, a deep sense of gentleness begins to open within the bones. This kindness is not a soft excuse for giving up, but a courageous willingness to meet our own self-scrutiny, without turning it into a reason to punish ourselves. You begin to understand why you wove the heavy defense in the first place. You see the younger version of yourself who learned that being perfectly unblemished was the only way to protect the stability of the house. The one who realized that looking flawless kept you safe in unpredictable environments. That habit served a purpose once, and it kept you secure in spaces where your raw vulnerabilities felt too dangerous to show. But tonight, as you lie in the quiet safety of this room, you can look at that unbending narrative facade with immense tenderness, recognizing that the old shield has become the very weight that locks your body against the bed. Letting go, in the true spiritual sense, does not mean throwing a bitter coldness into the faces of those who raised you, nor does it mean refusing to offer your best effort when the world requires your support. It simply means opening your closed teeth, releasing your desperate grip on an imaginary timeline of healing, and allowing the unformed clay of your spirit to absorb the dark and the light right where it sits. It is the recognition that you cannot force your life to look perfectly complete, no matter how much of your own sleep you sacrifice to hammer the structure in place. When you stop trying to act as the flawless ornament for the entire circle, the mind discovers a spacious, uncarved foundation that has been waiting underneath the strain all along. In a short while, this journey will take us deeper into the stone pottery house, moving past the smoke of the workspace into a place where the blueprint of our defenses begins to fully dissolve. We will see what happens when the potter stops trying to polish the text and finally learns to trust the raw texture of the open space. But for right now, let this understanding wash through the physical layers of your torso like a cool, clearing mountain fog. You do not need to smooth the entire framework of your life tonight, and you do not need to calculate how you will present your edges to the world tomorrow. The entire unshaped reality of your current sorrow can simply rest across the pillow, unmarked, unexplained, and completely unobserved. Feel the space between your shoulder blades become wide and flat against the linen, letting the small muscles around the neck relax their protective hold. Every time you breathe out, imagine the tightly bound joints of your mind losing just a fraction of their tension. The features do not need to be forced into a display of absolute stability. They only need to be granted the permission to settle, to soften, and to remain completely unvarnished in the quiet of the night. You are safe enough right now to let the chiseled facade crumble away into the dark, letting your true skin breathe in the quiet of the night. If it feels right, allow your attention to sink quietly into the soft, unhurried space of your physical form, observing the natural movement of the air without any effort to modify its rhythm. There is no need to create a perfect pattern of breathing tonight, nor is there any requirement to change the way your chest expands in this quiet hour. Perhaps you can simply observe the cool sensation as the breath enters the nose, moves past the throat, and expands the ribs with a calm, steady cadence. You might notice the gentle release as the air slips away, taking a small fraction of the day's inherited evaluation along with it. In this immediate space, nothing is expected of your alignment, and you are completely permitted to simply be a person supported by the ground. As you rest here, you may notice a specific obligation, an unshared problem, or a worry about the passing numbers of time beginning to rise into your awareness. Perhaps it is a systemic anxiety about your inherited reactions, or a hidden tension within your stomach that you feel you must constantly balance before the morning arrives. Instead of fighting this mental image, or scolding yourself for holding on to the weight, see if you can simply recognize the emotional pattern behind it. You can recognize the familiar urge to fire up the heavy machinery of self-defense, the ancient habit of stamping the surface so that the framework around you stays level. Even noticing this tendency is completely enough. There is absolutely no pressure to force a change or to make the worry disappear right now. If it feels comfortable, imagine taking that specific behavioral burden, that unshared responsibility, or that chronic anxiety about looking flawed, and placing it directly into a cracked wooden emblem stamp. See the dark object resting quietly within the landscape of your mind. Picture the dense wood, representing the intense effort you use to try and force a flat surface onto an unpredictable timeline. You are not trying to force it into a smooth finish right now. You are not searching for a new physical alignment, and you are not trying to calculate how you will present your features tomorrow. You might simply visualize the heavy, rigid weight over your stomach and lower ribs slowly opening its tight connections, allowing the hardened gaze to gently drop away under a slow wave of somatic relaxation. As the tension is released, look at how the internal imagery begins to transform entirely on its own. Without any forceful action from your side, the rigid lines roll back into their natural, unsealed ease. The sharp boundaries and tight alignments slide off the skin, leaving the belly completely wide, open, and unburdened. The small muscles around the diaphragm stop fighting the dark, shifting softly until they rest flat against the bone, distributing their weight evenly across the soft fabric below. The heat in your stomach loses its grip as the artificial architecture simply settles down into the stability of the earth. Let your awareness return gently to the physical presence of the bed, feeling the entire length of the spine sinking down into the soft support beneath it. The muscles running down the hinge of the jaw can completely surrender their vertical strain. The space between your eyebrows can remain wide, relaxed, and entirely unvarnished by the demands of the upcoming week. You can return to this simple sensation whenever you are ready, knowing that the internal sculptor has left the wheel for the night. There is no vessel to reinforce before the dawn, and nothing needs to be painted into an immovable state. The future can remain completely unaligned, porous, quiet, and perfectly still in the dark. Every quiet, effortless wave of your breath allows the core of your alignment to settle completely into the solid foundation of the mattress below. You can feel the vastness of this unadorned space expanding within your physical frame, creating a silent refuge where no external evaluation can reach you. No decorative performance is required, and no internal overseer is drafting the script for tomorrow's interactions. The old, exhaustive demand to project absolute tranquility for the comfort of others has fully burned itself out in the dark, leaving only the soft, uncarved reality of a human form supported entirely by the earth. True tranquility is discovered the exact second we stop demanding that our internal landscape look perfectly smooth before we give our bones permission to sink into the linen. The mind finds its genuine home not by fixing the fractures of the day, but by realizing that the raw clay vessel is completely whole right now, just as it sits in the deep shadows of the room. Let your consciousness float down into the lower abdomen, where the breath moves like water filling a deep, dark well. There is no need to count the cycles or to measure the depth of the expansion. You can simply allow the physical frame to occupy its true volume, without trying to tuck the stomach in or hold the ribs in a state of rigid readiness. You are completely off duty for the remaining hours of the night. The stories of your inadequacy, the lists of your undone tasks, and the images of your past days that seem to be moving faster can all sit quietly in the cool dampness of the pottery floor. They do not possess the power to pull you out of this bed unless you pick up the wooden tool to work them. Let the iron tools remain dark and still on the wooden bench, while your entire being settles into the vast, protective density of the uncarved earth. The deep chill of early winter began to turn the mountain paths slick, sending long gray streaks of frost down into the lower elderberry groves surrounding the workshop. Ren spent the following weeks working near the northern wall of the shed, his breath still catching slightly whenever the elder masters arrived to inspect the seasonal pottery production. Though he had stopped forcing the cherrywood emblem stamp into every bowl he threw, his lower ribs still carried a protective stiffness whenever he watched the other artisans gather around the central woodbox to discuss their progress. On this particular evening, the monastery was preparing for the arrival of a major winter storm, a season when the heavy mountain snow would put the entire unseasoned kiln under immense, dangerous atmospheric pressure. Ren had spent 3 solid days organizing a massive rare collection of storage jars, believing that keeping this inherited inventory completely free of dust would finally prove to the entire valley that he was no longer lagging behind the standards of his lineage. Beside the low archway of the drying room, Master Dago stood silently in the damp air, his heavy arms crossed over his linen tunic, listening to the high wind scream through the tops of the mountain pines. The atmosphere was thick with the clean, sharp smell of wet mountain loam, heated charcoal, and the bitter scent of scorched elderberry leaves from the nearby stove. Ren stepped onto the wet floorboards carrying his work, his chest automatically tightening as he prepared to place a large, wet vessel into the critical center display gap. Suddenly, the unstable shutters above the desk gave way under the weight of the wind. A heavy cascade of loose frost and wet rain slammed directly into the work table, striking the unbaked clay container and creating a deep, irregular indentation right across its center axis, causing the soft walls to sag into two blurred fragments. 3 days of intense, secret perfectionism were instantly reduced to a heap of damp, unusable mud. The artisan's torso immediately locked into an intense, burning posture of total humiliation. His fingers clamped onto the edges of the desk, his eyes widened in panic, and a wave of raw inadequacy flooded his throat as he realized the elders would see the inventory left damaged before the storm arrived. The internal litigation in his mind began to scream that this accident was absolute proof of his incompetence, that he was fundamentally trapped in the family defect, and that he should drop his tools and leave the workshop entirely before the dawn exposed his failure. He wanted to scream at the rain, to curse the wind, and to treat the sudden distortion as a permanent verdict on his worth as a potter. But in that exact moment of rising flight, Ren stopped his hands. He did not attempt to frantically reshape the wet earth over the fire, and he did not voice a loud defense to protect his reputation from the passing monks. He simply sat down directly on the cold oak floorboards, right beside the large, unpolished piece of storage wood that rested near the tool bench. He closed his eyes and took one slow, deliberate breath, letting the thin, cold air expand the very center of his chest, allowing the heavy ache behind his breastbone to simply exist without any immediate correction. He did not try to pretend the loss had not occurred, and he did not try to force an artificial sense of Zen calm over his panic. He chose to sit directly with the raw, uncarved uncertainty of the ruined page, stopping the old habit of treating his frantic thoughts as the absolute truth. He opened his eyes and looked at the irregular indentation. Instead of running away from the mess, he reached down with an open, relaxed hand and began to clear the wet ice off the desk, his movements carrying a low, calm precision that required no audience. As he cleared the table, he noticed a young novice from the lower valley, who had been assigned to help haul the wood bundles, standing shivering in the corner of the wet veranda, his hands bleeding from the sharp frozen twigs and looking entirely forgotten by the frantic crew above. Without a single word of explanation or self-pity, Ren walked to the wooden toolbox, picked up his own soft wool cloths that he used to clean the raw clay shards, and bound them gently around the bleeding fingers of the young novice. He did not wait for an expression of gratitude, nor did he look up to see if Master Daigo was observing his charity. He simply offered the protection out of a quiet, unchipped presence that required no external validation to feel adequate. The young novice looked down at his bound hands, his posture softening as the heavy wool shielded his skin from the sharp frost. He looked up at Ren with an unembellished nod of recognition, a simple exchange that carried no social glaze but held a deep, unpolished reality. The raw earthen wall remained damp. The perfect layout was completely ruined. Yet the space between the two men was entirely full, resting quietly in the shadows without needing a single smooth surface to prove its worth. Master Daigo stepped forward from the dark archway, looking at the damp loam and the heavy wooden chest that lay unchipped in the twilight. The old man remarked that a vessel does not fail because a single piece changes its shape before the season is dry. The mountain is already wide enough to carry the weight of the storm, and your nature has never been a shattered fragment waiting for a permanent seal to give it dignity. True transformation does not mean you preserve an earth that can never be altered by the wind. It means you discover that your own unshaped weight is a sacred footing that needs no perfect finish to carry the haul. Ren looked out over the vast, dark field of the forest floor, realizing how many years he had spent treating his own heart as a damaged tablet that had to be continuously ground down to escape the shame of being unready. The quiet, heavy ache behind his breastbone was still a soft sensation, and his old fear of being exposed remained a distant murmur in his awareness. But as he stood up on the damp gravel beside the master potter, letting his hands hang loosely at his sides, he carried himself with one small, enduring shift. He would continue to clear the shelves for the monastery library, but he would let the clay remain irregular whenever the mountain chose the raw shape, trusting the self-contained gravity of his own spirit rather than the artificial measurements of the world. This internal shift beside the wet loam layout illuminates the precise mental machinery that keeps your nervous system awake tonight. When we look deeply into the root of this continuous exhaustion, we discover that the depletion rarely comes from the actual presence of an inherited trait or the physical reality of a passing memory. The true weight accumulates in the continuous hidden labor of simulation that we run behind the scenes of our eyes. We spend our lives running a frantic internal workshop, constantly hammering at our own history and scanning the environment for any sign of disapproval, driven by a deep fear that if we ever relax our guard, our presence will be judged as completely inadequate. This chronic demand for structural perfection becomes a heavy taxation we levy against our own body, forcing us to continuously rehearse tomorrow's encounters, rewrite yesterday's perceived failures, and cross-examine our current progress as if we were standing before a cold, critical assembly of judges. We even try to repair our own natural sense of unreadiness by using the harsh instrument of self-blame. We judge our minds for feeling anxious. We scold our throat for holding a heavy constriction. And we slowly turn our very imperfections into a permanent description of who we are. We begin to view ourselves not as a tired human being who is doing their best to navigate a difficult mountain trail, but as a fundamentally fractured clay vessel that must be constantly reshaped to have any right to carry the haul. This constant internal forcing creates a deep, chronic strain that settles directly behind the breastbone and locks the muscles of the stomach into a narrow, restricted alignment. Ancient insights remind us that there is a profound distinction between the unavoidable cold raindrops of life and the secondary layers of burden we actively build onto the moment. Think of the unexpected reaction or the unreturned investment of patience that life brings as a single, unstamped clay bowl lying on the table of the workspace floor. An abrupt change in your personal path, an inherited phrase in your throat, or a quiet wave of natural sorrow is simply that raw loam. It rests there, and it naturally carries its own plain weight. That is the primary friction of living in a world shared with other human beings. But the mind, in its terror of looking insufficient, immediately reaches for the heavy tools of resistance. We begin to strike the vessel in our thoughts, trying to press the heavy wooden emblem down with double the force, demanding that the open margin instantly flatten itself out, and filling the entire floor of our awareness with sharp, chaotic splinters of panic. The original event took up only a small space in reality, but our internal litigation goes on for hours, creating a heavy, rigid weight that restricts the very breath in our lungs. Peace does not come from finding a magical valley where no old reactions ever surface, or where no family phantoms ever move. A life completely free of sudden memories, shifting boundaries, or irregular behaviors does not exist anywhere in the human world. True spiritual freedom begins when you stop treating every inherited habit as a sign that you must change your design, allowing the earthen vessel to rest in the center of the vault and letting its margin remain unsealed until the morning. You change your relationship with the past by choosing not to turn it into an immediate emergency project for your anxiety. When you rest with this understanding in the quiet hours of the night, you realize that you do not need to secure the approval of the entire universe to earn the right to relax your muscles. The chronic scanning you feel is not a failure of character. It is simply an old, well-worn path that your body takes when it feels completely unprotected. You can look at the impulse to overexert. You can feel the heavy collapse right behind the breastbone. And you can surround that whole hypervigilant pattern with an immense, quiet tenderness. Instead of using shame to force your feelings into a state of artificial readiness, You can simply observe the open framework of your worries without letting your fingers hold the wooden tool. This is the precise moment where the center of the chest begins to settle into a much deeper layer of reality. You start to see that the validation you have been trying to secure is completely unnecessary for your structure to exist, and the uncertainty around you is not a threat, but a vast capacity that naturally knows how to hold whatever changes arrive. The upcoming weeks are not a fragile path waiting to crush you. They are simply an interconnected landscape that will reveal its own texture one step at a time, completely independent of how much sleep you sacrifice to scan it tonight. You can allow your presence to remain completely unshaped, without needing to wear its hypothetical smoothness as your current armor. Let this realization settle into the deep spaces between your shoulder blades, letting the physical upper back turn wide and flat against the mattress. You are not required to smooth every relationship, or to resolve the alignment of the next year before you are allowed to rest. The tools can be left on the wooden bench. The heavy, cracked wooden stamps can remain dark, and the entire framework of your life can remain completely loose, unsealed, and free from the burden of absolute protection. Now let this ancient pottery shed insight travel all the way down into the very specific texture of your modern afternoon. The unadorned clay bowl we carry does not exist in an abstract mountain chamber. It functions inside the small, mundane transactions of our everyday routines. You can see it in the way you hold your digital interface in the palm of your hand, staring at a blank screen while waiting for a response that has not arrived yet. Every minute of silence from the other person feels like an irregular twist in your story that you must immediately correct, trying to force an instant alignment, wondering if your own shifting presence has caused a defect in their opinion of you, and drawing a complex map of failure out of a brief delay. You might notice it when you feel an intense pressure to smile and offer an agreeable comment during a meeting, even though your stomach is tied in a narrow contraction, choosing to wear a mask of absolute calm because showing your true fatigue feels far too dangerous. We carry this heavy cosmetic labor into our most intimate relationships, constantly checking the emotional temperature of the house, trying to balance the scales of everyone else's comfort, while our own internal reservoir runs completely dry. You feel the weight of this labor when you lie awake at midnight, replaying a minor conversational slip from 3 days ago, treating a single sign of family conditioning as if it were a catastrophic flaw that requires a lifetime of mental grinding to smooth away. We look at the lives of others through a glowing glass screen, comparing our raw internal terrain to their polished exterior, instantly concluding that we have fallen behind, that we are missing the mark, and that we must work twice as hard to draw a version of ourselves that matches an ideal structure. Even when the body demands a moment of deep stillness, a subtle wave of guilt surfaces within the heart, whispering that rest is a luxury you have not yet earned, forcing you to treat an hour of quiet recovery as if it were a defect in your production. Living this way turns every single day into an exhausting act of performance. But the practice of inner freedom is built in the tiny gaps between the world's demands and your internal reaction. It begins when you experience a sudden surge of panic during a difficult conversation, and instead of immediately offering an easy, pleasing lie to diffuse the tension, you choose to take one slow, grounded breath before you speak. You do not have to orchestrate a perfect response, and you do not have to fix their discomfort. You simply allow the moment to be slightly heavy, standing still like the unornamented clay in the windless workshop, remaining open in the frost without needing to apply a single stamp right that second. This modern application means realizing that the frantic thoughts circulating through your mind are merely old, automated patterns, not absolute commands that you must obey. When the internal voice tells you that you are fundamentally insufficient, or that you must stay awake to solve the riddle of tomorrow, you can look at that thought with an immense, quiet curiosity. You can recognize it as a coarse wooden ridge, a familiar piece of old material, without allowing the iron tools to trace it through your features. You learn to care for the human beings around you with an open, relaxed palm, rather than a desperate, white-knuckle grip. You can offer kindness without sacrificing your own boundaries. understanding that true love does not require you to turn your own spirit into a flat background for others to build on. As the night deepens, you are completely allowed to drop the wooden tool right where it sits. You do not need to achieve a flawless state of self-improvement before you have permission to close your eyes. The unread messages, the incomplete projects, and the shifting moods of the world can remain completely suspended in the dark, without your mind needing to touch them again until the morning. Rest is not a reward that you must buy with a day of perfect compliance. It is your basic, unalienable nature, a vast space that has been waiting for you to simply step out of the workspace. Let the entire day go slack, allowing the cords to fall loosely to the earth. As we prepare to drift into the deepest stillness of the night, the dark hour has fully settled over the deep mountain pottery shed, and the quietness of the windless elderberry grove is gathering into the space around you. The burning friction of the internal preservation workshop has dissolved into complete stillness, leaving only the cool, unmoving foundation of the oak floorboards. The cracked cherrywood stamp, the heavy grinding paddles, and the charcoal kiln heaters have all been laid down on the low working bench of the mind. Every single expression you perform today, every behavioral evaluation you calculated, and every generational loop you tried to outsmart can simply remain unmarked and motionless in the dark. Your chest is sinking deeper into the support below, with every slow, quiet breath becoming completely grounded, heavy, and still. The muscles along the lower margin of the ribs are widening, softening, and losing their rigid presentation, expanding like the wide, unornamented earthen vessels that rest effortlessly under the cold winter sky. The eyes are completely relaxed, releasing the final, lingering strain of looking out for the preservation of the lineage. The breath moves into the body with a slow, feather-light softness, requiring absolutely no decoration, no forced warmth, and no filter of explanation from your side. You are returning to an original state of raw mountain loam, a spacious sanctuary that exists long before the traditional clan emblems were ever carved. The heavy mask of total compliance you wove around your awareness is slipping away from the skin, dropping into the cool dark like a dry elderberry leaf that has finally outlived its season. You are entirely safe enough in this dark room to stop repairing the universe, allowing the unread markers, the incomplete projects, and the shifting moods of tomorrow to rest exactly as they are. Nothing needs to be stamped, nothing needs to be prearranged, and nothing needs to be made level before you allow your consciousness to sink into sleep. Imagine a single lump of unformed, moist clay resting silently on the exact center of a perfectly still wheel in the absolute darkness of the shed. The delicate earth does not trace the movement of the winter frost. It does not anticipate the speed of the next morning's spin, and it does not judge its own damp, uneven profile. It simply rests, becoming heavier and more secure in the dark wooden bay with every passing minute, entirely protected from the family storms that move far above its grain. Let your own internal awareness become just like that resting loam, heavy, porous, and deeply anchored in the quiet floor of the world. The whole timeline of your ancestral history is completely still, and the internal artisan that documented your flaws has left the workshop to receive the night. You are permitted to let the features go completely blank, drifting down into the weightless, vast dark where no vessels are forced. If the unadorned density of the raw earth is already wide enough to hold the dark of the ridge without breaking under the frost, what ancient crest could ever add to the absolute completeness of your own quiet rest? The absolute completeness of your own quiet rest requires no validation from the passage of the hours, because the true nature of your spirit has always been a self-contained sanctuary that remains entirely whole precisely as it sits in the dark. As you lie here in the deep, windless stillness of the winter night, this same unadorned refuge begins to expand within the very center of your chest. The small, frantic workshop that spent the daytime hours trying to force a bright, decorative finish over your changing features has cooled down into complete darkness. The heavy smoke of emotional performance has entirely cleared from the rafters of your awareness, leaving only a wide, open vault where your breath can move without a single filter of external compliance. You do not need to construct a flawless narrative to protect your place on this earth. The world is entirely capable of carrying your raw fatigue, your unvoiced longing, and your quiet weight without asking you to seal a single false conclusion. Every slow, rhythmic inhalation is a gentle invitation to return to the simplicity of your unaltered presence, reminding you that your true value exists long before you ever try to win the final race against the clock. When we rest deeply in this spacious clarity, we begin to discover the profound peace of what the ancient potters call the unprinted self. This is the part of your awareness that remains completely untouched by the changing expectations of the environment, standing steady like the cold, dense oak floorboards beneath the workshop rafters. The wood does not strain itself to look unweathered when the winter mist rolls through the ridge, nor does it judge its own matte texture for becoming silver and dark. It simply allows the mountain air to touch its grain, holding its density without a single ounce of internal friction or self-condemnation. The changing levels of your physical energy, the moments where you were left mourning a past season of high performance, and the unwritten paths of your upcoming weeks are merely brief shadows passing over the surface of the earth. They do not alter the fundamental safety of your structure, and they do not require you to wear out your own spirit trying to manufacture a hot glaze to change them. You can allow the attention of others to shift like the wind. You can allow the day to settle with all its rough, unfinished margins, and you can allow your own face to drop into an immense, unobserved blankness in the middle of the quiet night. Let the absolute weight of this deep stillness spread through the small muscles of your cheeks, allowing the jaw joints to unlatch completely until the teeth separate and the lips turn soft. The skin across the forehead is perfectly smooth and cool, completely released from the warm, gripping tension that comes from mentally reading the mirror or calculating the vitality of tomorrow. You do not have to perform the role of the invulnerable anchor, the unchanging facade, or the stabilizer tonight. The mattress beneath you requires no polished presentation, no forced strength, and no decorative gestures to hold you secure. In the dark, it simply absorbs the full, unvarnished depth of your exhaustion, with an unconditional, vast stability. The unresolved dynamics of your modern life, the unanswered text threads on your device, and the expectations you feel you must meet can sit quietly on the low working bench, completely frozen and still, while your consciousness drifts further and further away into the dark, restorative waters of absolute slumber. Picture a single drop of mountain dew sliding slowly off a sharp pine needle, falling silently into a shallow stone basin hidden within the courtyard. The drop touches the surface, creates a few brief, circular ripples, and then completely blends into the quiet, cool body of the water, leaving the surface perfectly flat once again. The basin does not struggle against the ripple. It does not try to freeze the movement to maintain an artificial brightness, and it does not worry about the next drop that might fall from the canopy. It simply remains still, porous, and completely quiet, absorbing the ambient shadows and the deep silence of the ridge into its endless center. Let your own internal awareness become just like that quiet basin of water, so spacious and steady that every passing physical anxiety or lingering regret can simply dissolve into your vast internal quietude without leaving a single fracture behind. You are completely permitted to lay down the wooden tool, to extinguish the furnace of your performance, and to allow the current of the night to carry you into the deepest, most restorative rest. The weight of the skull is fully met by the pillow. The throat is wide and free to expand with the slow, quiet tide of the breath, and the entire modern world has receded into a distant, harmless murmur. There is absolutely nothing left for you to illuminate, nothing left for you to calculate, and no family phantoms left for you to hold up through the dark. You have returned to the quiet home that has been waiting underneath the performance machinery all along, a space where the loam is perfectly cool, the table is completely still, and the heart is finally free to sleep. The vast dark carries the mind further into this untroubled valley, where the boundary between the quiet body and the quiet room begins to soften and fade away entirely. Every small breath is a gentle wave that washes over the old, tired habits of the day, smoothing out the internal pathways like water moving over smooth river stone. You can feel the immense relaxation spreading down through the lower back, the thighs, the calves, and into the soles of the feet, leaving the entire physical frame completely weightless and loose. The persistent voice that insisted you must always be hypervigilant, always ready to balance the scales of the world, has grown completely faint, like a distant temple bell echoing once across the misty ridges before falling silent. You do not need to keep watch over the horizon tonight. The world is capable of turning on its axis without your constant protection. And the seasons are held in their own paths, completely free of your need to weave their comfort for them. This brings a profound realization of what it truly means to exist without defense. In the ancient understanding of the mind, we learn that our true nature is not a fragile thing that needs to be constantly hidden behind a wall of compliance or structural force. The true self is like the deep space of the night itself, completely uninjured by the storms that pass through it, completely untouched by the years that were spoken or left unsealed. When you stop treating every difficult transition as a personal failure that must be immediately corrected with a hot clamp, you allow the mind to return to its natural state of weightless clarity. The heavy stamp has lost all its grip, unspooling its cords into long, relaxed lines that simply rest on the clean earth. You are finally allowed to step completely out of the workshop, leaving the tools of self-protection behind, and walking out into the wide, open air where nothing is demanded of your spirit. Let the absolute peace of this moment sink into the deep center of your chest, allowing the lungs to expand with a slow, effortless freedom that requires no justification. The room around you is perfectly still, the cool air carrying the faint, clean scent of damp earth and mountain rain into the quiet spaces of the house. You are completely permitted to let go of the need to be the strong one, the unchanging one, or the one who fixes the fractures of the day. The bed beneath you is entirely willing to carry the full, unvarnished depth of your exhaustion, absorbing the weight of the limbs and the quiet surrender of the mind, without asking for anything in return. The unfinished business of your life, the moments you wish had gone differently, and the endless lists for tomorrow can sit quietly in the dark, completely frozen and still, while you drift further and further away into the deep waters of rest. Picture a single candle flame burning brightly inside a small, sturdy stone lantern high on a windswept mountain ridge. The wind may howl through the pines, and the fog may press against the thick glass, but the flame itself remains perfectly steady, casting a soft, warm glow over the smooth river stones below. It does not fight the wind. It does not try to illuminate the entire valley, and it does not worry about how long the night will last. It simply burns with a quiet, unbothered constancy, resting completely in its own warmth. Let your own internal awareness become just like that steady, protected flame, entirely safe within the sanctuary of your own body, completely undisturbed by the external weather of the world. You have woven your last defense for the day. You have dropped the wooden tool, and the entire fabric of your life is completely loose, spacious, and free. Let the mind let go of its final hold on the world, dropping down into the deep, dark, restorative silence of absolute slumber, where the heart is entirely at home. The wooden framework is perfectly quiet. The spirit is finally free to sleep,